I'd like to call to order this special meeting of the Santa Barbara Unified School District's Board of Education for Tuesday, February 20th. We will begin by rising to say the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Matsuoka.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Moving to item 3, Spanish translation of this meeting is available to those that need it. So if there's anyone here that needs Spanish translation. And we do have headsets available for the hearing impaired on the side tables, I'm assuming. So if anyone in the audience would like a headset, we have those available. We have no public comments at this time. We have nothing on the consent or action agenda. So we will start with the report discussion section of the meeting. Item 1. Item 1 being the first reading and discussion of Board Policy 0420, School Plans, Site Councils. Mr. Matsuoka.
So thank you, Board, for taking time on your, what is today, Tuesday? Tuesday afternoon to tackle some of these board policies. We have quite a backlog of board policies, as we've shared with you, to catch up on. And what we decided on is we focused on some from the business division and from the zero division. The 0000 is really the work of the board, although there are policies that overlap with the instructional division. And we did pay attention to those that are pretty time sensitive, like the language around school plans has moved away from whatever it was before language to now. It references a lot of LCAP language. And so we picked on the ones, and we actually put them in order by sort of sense of urgency around time. There are some where our current board policy, if you were to look it up, has language from the prior assessment era. Like API doesn't exist anymore. And so we brought before you the policies that we thought were really timely. Now, as far as your input, if it's minor, we'll note those corrections and then we'll bring those back on consent at the next board meeting. There are some that we may want to bring back for further discussion. Okay, so that's sort of the big picture. This first one is the board policy about school plans, and let me get to it. Okay, so Mr. Rouse has got it. I'm not gonna, I think myself and staff, we're not gonna offer much in the way of commentary. You had a chance to read it. Hopefully, if you had any questions or comments about the language, we pretty much took the CSBA recommended changes. That's what you see, the strikeouts, and the language that's new is CSBA's recommended template. There was one policy that we are going to wait on because Cabinet actually needs to think through some of the details. Okay, so this first one is school plans and site councils. Comments or questions?
Board, do we have any comments or questions? Ms. Capps.
More generally, could you flag when there's an instance in which the language is different than the CSBA for a particular reason?
Yes, we will. I will tell you, at least on the ones that I brought forward, and Ms. Jate, you'll have to answer for any you brought forward. If there's any local change, we'll have to think about how to note that and track changes.
Or they're in there.
Well, all the ones that I brought forward are the ones, I think they are CSBA recommendations.
All of the ones that we have in ours are tracked. They're in the green.
Right, the question is the edit and the strike through driven by a CSBA recommendation, or is it driven by a local recommendation by Cabinet? That's the distinction. And I will say that anything that I'm bringing to you today is CSBA.
Okay.
And I think for staff, we would just have to figure out a track changes model that uses a different color probably for a local change, yeah.
I mean, it's more generally a request for verbal heads up if there's something that is changed because something happened on one of our schools, you know, that's of significance. I don't, if it's a language thing, I'm not asking for that, but just more something that you feel strongly about and you made the change. Thanks.
So any input about school plans and site councils?
All right, so can we bring this forward to our consent agenda? All right, we'll move on to our second reading. This is actually item number 2, first reading and discussion for deletion of board policy 0420, school-based program coordination. Mr. Matsuoka.
So I'll spend hardly any energy on explaining when CSBA recommends to delete a policy. I just say quietly, hooray, and move on. So CSBA has deleted this policy in their template.
All right, I see there's no questions or comments, so we'll again bring this to our consent agenda. Moving to item number 3. First reading and discussion of board policy 0460, local control and accountability plan. Mr. Matsuoka.
So this is really important language because local control as a framework has been with us for, are we in our 4th year of local control funding formula, local control accountability plans. It was year 3 or 4 of the LCAPs, year 5. Wow, time flies when you're adapting to new things. And so this is language that catches up policy with the philosophy and the frameworks required by Ed Code for LCAP development. Any questions?
Questions? All right, moving forward, we'll bring that to our consent agenda. Item number 4, first reading and discussion of board policy 0500, accountability. Mr. Matsuoka.
As we all have been learning, the accountability plan is headed towards the dashboard with they're called Hardy balls. You know, they're colored, the pie charts, different colors. There's actually more and more data that's starting to be understood from those dashboards, and so this is a pretty big overhaul of board policy in alignment with an entirely new accountability system.
So any questions, comments, board? All right, moving forward, we'll move that to our consent agenda and moving forward to report discussion number 5. First reading and discussion for deletion of board policy 0520.2, title Program Improvement Schools. Mr. Matsuoka.
Again, a policy that has been rendered out of date by changes in, this must be federal law because it's Title I. So this is a policy that's really easy. We will delete it at a second reading.
All right, Ms. Parker.
I just want to embrace this one with joy.
Thank you so much.
We should put that in the minutes.
Embracing with joy and moving forward. We'll put that on the consent agenda and now moving to item number 6. First reading and discussion of board policy 3100, budget. Ms. Jate.
Good evening, board members. So this is also a recommendation, and by law, actually, SB 751 changed the requirement for districts to be able to go up to 10% in their reserve, unless you're a basic aid district, and then you can have whatever you want in your reserve amount. Since we are bouncing in and out of basic aid the next few years, we will be watching that. If you go on page 4, under assigned fund balances, we moved a paragraph, and this is something that we did. Ms. Cass was wondering about when we actually made this change. We just took that language and moved it down. Go up a little more, Brian. No, okay. see it says to protect the district. We moved that down under reserve budget, or reserve balance, because we felt it was better placed there. And then we put the language in regarding the 10%. So when we are a revenue limit district, we aren't allowed to go above 10%. However, we have it in our board policy, and as we go into basic aid, we can have as much in our reserve as we want. Any questions? So I can bring it back on consent? Thank you.
Yes, you may. We'll move on to item number 7. First reading and discussion of board policy 3280, sale, lease, rental of district-owned real property. Mr. Tay.
Okay, so reading through this board policy, I couldn't imagine if we would ever sell any of our properties. We did that in the past and we regretted it. So, but it just points out what you can do with the money that you get when you sell property, and also that it's deleting the requirement to first offer surplus property to charter schools with at least 80 students. So those are the two main changes.
Ms. Sims-Moton.
Can you just talk about that a little bit more? Did we do that in the past too?
Well, that was law. That was law. So if a charter school comes up and they have 80 of our kids and 80 enrolled, we have to offer them a place. And if we had surplus property with a school, an empty school, they would get first rights. That no longer exists.
Ms. Parker.
I just want to be sure, especially with that deletion of the lease of real property with joint occupancy, that there's nothing in this document that changes anything about our tandem plans.
No,
Thank you.
I had that checked.
Okay, thank you.
So I can bring it back on consent?
Yes, thank you.
So in the next couple ones, we'll have Anne Marie Cavatinelli from our purchasing department and Dave Hanknow do the next few.
Perfect. Well, that is item number 8. First reading and discussion of board policy 3311.
Good afternoon. So, Board Policy 3311 addresses the bidding process for procurement of personal property as well as public works contracts. Mostly, it was just an addition of a new board policy about the Uniform Public Construction Cost Accounting Procedures that was brought to board on the 23rd of January. As a first reading, it was just pulled out as a separate item because it has gotten to the point where that policy is become more prevalent in school districts.
Any questions, comments, board? All right, thank you very much. I think we'll move that to consent.
Move that to consent.
And we'll now move to item number 9. First reading and discussion of board policy 3513.4, drug and alcohol-free schools. Mr. Hacknow.
Thank you. First of all, on my background, spell checker did it to me again. Next to the last sentence, I say district-opened facilities, and it should be district-owned facilities. This relates to all facilities that the district owns. Board policy for staff and students is covered under other policies, but I want to bring to your attention item number 3 on this policy, which would allow alcoholic beverages served at a district-owned facility under certain conditions. The law allows you to do so with the superintendent's approval based on those conditions, or if you don't wish to have alcohol at all served on district property, we can modify this board policy and take out item 3. It will be up to the board. California School Boards Association does not make a recommendation to us one way or the other. They just put number 3 in there because it is allowed by law. If you do want to allow it, I would then ask Mr. Matsuoka and Cabinet to review Administrative Regulation 1330, which dictates our Civic Center rentals to reflect any changes that you would want for that. But I think it's important to point that out, and you may want to discuss it at a later time today. It could be a hot topic.
Board, Ms. Parker?
I hope it's not a hot topic. I mean, I personally think it's appropriate per California law to have it in there as a possibility because we look at our schools as community centers as well, and there are some nonprofits that would like that option and that we could then make it available to them through the superintendent and through code. So I think it's appropriate to leave 3 in and to have a superintendent in place who can use law and best judgment for the limited purposes that would be available.
Ms. Sims Martin?
I would agree with that. I would just add, so if we're allowing that to whatever the communities, entities that want to use it, is it in their contract language as to their responsibility for that, so there's not any liability on the district?
Correct. If the board approved this policy with item number 3 in there, then I would ask Cabinet to amend Administrative Regulation 1330, and then we would set all of our guidelines to make sure that the people have gone through all the steps for the proper licenses, to make sure there's no students on campus, and to make sure the superintendent was fully aware of what was going on before he made his decision, or she, in the future.
I have a question, actually. I don't know if Ms. Parker can answer this or someone in the cabinet, but historically, when have we had utilized, had alcohol on the premises for what?
So it's been illegal, completely illegal on school campuses for decades at this point. And so it was only about 1.5 years ago maybe that they changed the law, because there's so many areas where, it's a small town and this is your only community venue. I think that it was led by rural lawmakers who said, look, we need to have some flexibility. And so it hasn't happened, and it won't happen unless and until we make some changes in our own policy to reflect what's happened in state law.
Thank you. Ms. Sims Martin?
And could this be one of those that if we're going to do that it comes before the board as opposed to ratifying it later? Because sometimes we have different things that come to us after the fact, even though we're allowed to do it. So if we were making a contract, could that come before the board before we make that decision? Or
Typically, it would not come before the board and be at the superintendent's discretion for approval of civic center rentals. There's dozens that happen every week. But whatever direction the board wanted to give
I
to
would just
us,
ask
we
you
would.
that question just because sometimes things come to us after it's happened, and since we're adding this and we've not traditionally had that, so I would recommend that at least it come here, or at least something to report from the superintendent. So.
I'll weigh in on this one, but I don't know the laws around this because I've never had to deal with it. I just assume not deal with it. But it does make sense in small communities where, the school is the only public venue. So I appreciate the intent. As far as the board, approving use of facilities around unique one-off situations, I really don't want to bring all those because we process hundreds a year. If you're saying we'd like to review a potential use of alcohol at an event, I'd be open to that, but I don't like the idea of us starting to bring that layer of operations to the board, because if we start doing that, then it's going to lead to other curiosities and requests for field trips and all these things. Well, field trips, we need to get those to you in advance, but I don't anticipate this being a priority.
And I wasn't suggesting, and I apologize if that's what the intent, that you understood that to be, is that in that case, if we could, I would like to see, I don't know that we're going to have those, but I'm not saying everyone, but maybe the ones where we're going to be serving alcohol.
I would prefer to leave the language as it is, but just to know that if it comes up, that this is something that maybe the superintendent would do a report for us to say, is this actually, because it's the same in our community as it is for rural communities in that it's very expensive for nonprofits to use other types of venues. And so I really feel like we're the best deal in town. But I don't want us to be having weddings, for example, on our campuses where they're serving alcohol and things like that. I think that there need to be some discussion with cabinet about, you know, what sort of parameters do you put around it that it's something that's not common. I think it would be something just for us to look at in the future, you know, just for you guys to work on it and give us some feedback in the future, but just to leave that in there for now and see how it develops.
Mr. Che?
If you may remember, we brought this to the board about 1.5 years ago. And I did a lot of research with the principals, and they had a lot of issues with this because they were worried about how their facility would smell the next day. Would it smell of alcohol? We're not promoting drugs and alcohol, so why would we have it on the campus? But the biggest thing, our biggest areas are our gymnasiums and our theaters. And that's what they were most concerned about, is that there would be the smell and we couldn't get it out. And how do we keep kids off the campus? How do we know if a child doesn't walk on campus and we have alcohol on our campus? They were concerned about that. If there's a game going on and there's the facility was being used with alcohol, it's just too much conflict in how many kids are on campus. All our campuses are used, and this Carrie will back this up, they're being used by our kids all the time. So it would only be weekends, and they were very concerned about the way their facility would smell.
I think this raises some red flags to think about, to consider. Also, I mean, it's one thing to have, I mean, I was thinking like at a game, but like I know, for example, Santa Barbara Ed Foundation is a nonprofit here in town that supports our district, and they would have loved or have opportunity to do a nonprofit fundraiser here. But I guess what are the parameters in terms of the usage of alcohol and what particular activities? I mean, I think that would be really important to understand. Yes, Ms. Parker?
Yeah, because it seems like, so what if the Santa Barbara Education Foundation wanted to hold a fundraiser here at the district office, for example? You know, if we had that possibility in there, but then the superintendent has created a regulation around it where it's just someplace where there wouldn't be students, it just seems like it would give a little bit of flexibility. So, just my 2 cents.
Any other comments? Well, I think the fact is that we would like to have some clarification as to what usage it would be, when you would actually use alcohol beverage. I mean, I can see at the district office where students would never be here, and versus, you know, on a gymnasium or at a football field where potentiality of something going wrong in terms of alcohol being brought there, you know, or maybe bottles left, I don't know, you know, people in cleanup crews. So I just think it would be real, I think as far as I'm concerned, we can leave number 3 in, but I really think there needs to be discretion as to how it is being used. And I think to Ms. Sims-Moten's point, that perhaps if it was going to be something that was on a field or on a school campus where students might have opportunity to get the alcohol or be around it or smell it, that we should really consider that situation.
I feel and hear so many cautions around this. Like, let me ask this question. What would be a scenario where we would be okay and would feel good in concert with our community that we would have alcohol on a school premise?
Well, I would speak to Santa Barbara Ed Foundation. Something where it's supporting the district and it's a fundraiser that's directly linked to the district. Something like that.
Yeah, and, you know, if they could use a facility at, you know, 0 or low cost, it would help their budget. Okay, so there are scenarios. So we'll take a look at the ARs and see what kind of language we can put in place so that there's, I guess there's the right due process is not quite the right word, but just that there's a good process so that the board is informed about, here's a situation where we think it's appropriate.
So bring us back on to number 3?
Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
And so for staff, we'll just have to make sure that we, Ms. Jate, why don't you and I look at the AR language and just see what's there and make sure that we've got enough language to meet the needs of the board.
Thank you. So moving on to item number 10, first reading and discussion of Board Policy 3270, sale and disposal of books, equipment, and supplies. Ms. Jate, or, I'm sorry.
Hello again. Okay, this policy is obviously to address the disposal of our surplus property. As mentioned before, the one item that was changed locally was to expound on how the board approves the surplus property. The code infers that surplus would be brought at the time of disposal, whereas our past practice has been to pass a resolution, excuse me, at the beginning of each fiscal year to have the superintendent or designee make those decisions as surplus arises and the need is there for things to be disposed. So I've included a copy of the resolution there for your review, and it's mostly just to outline that process of the resolution as opposed to just a blanket approval by the board each time we have surplus to dispose of.
Board, Ms. Parker?
Well, I appreciate some of the things that are being crossed out in this one, like the whole section that just says it doesn't exceed $2,500 value, the property may be sold without advertising for bids, and instead it makes it really clear that it can be disposed of in your local public dump.
That actually was the CSBA language.
I'm glad, because I just feel like I know that if a school has some shelves that they need to get rid of, this classroom needs to get rid of a few desks, they're certainly worth less than $2,500, but it's hard to, especially with your time. Yeah, maybe you'd get $50 for them on eBay, but it is not worth your time. And I feel like it's pretty common for things to end up having to sit for a while
Right.
as the district is figuring out are they sellable, or, what are other options. So I appreciate the clarification that you can just get rid of it.
And that is another piece of this, that we do not have storage. So most of the time when we have things that need to be disposed, it gets picked up and taken care of right away because we don't have any place to just have a holding spot for it to sit until somebody can get around to putting it on eBay or taking care of it that way.
Do you feel like this is enough for the district office in terms of being able to move things quickly out of school campuses?
I do.
Changes are
We
enough?
have been basically doing it this way
Okay.
since for years.
All right, okay, that's great then, thank you.
All right. It looks like we'll move that to consent. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you.
We'll now move on to item number 11, first reading and discussion for elimination of Board Policy 3517, facilities inspection. Mr. Hedges.
Thank you. Basically, this board policy becomes an administrative regulation. And everything stays in there. It's just an AR, which is more appropriate for what is there.
All right, we'll move that to consent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving to item number 12, first reading and discussion of Board Policy 5113.1, chronic absence and truancy. Ms. Wagner. Dr. Wagner. Excuse me.
Thank you, Dr. Reed. Good afternoon, Board. First policy I bring to you is in regards to chronic absence and truancy. Know that you've reviewed it, will not go through it
in detail, but really just overall it kind of philosophically brings the policy into this new era of accountability around chronic absenteeism. And I would say that the one, in response to Ms. Capps' question about CSBA boilerplate versus our changes, at the bottom of the first page, the change where it says chronic absence, comma, including truancy. CSBA had put and truancy. In terms of our practice in Santa Barbara Unified and best practices that I have put into place, truancy is a form of chronic absenteeism, so that's why I just made that little distinction there. That is the only change besides, and then on the second page actually there's a change in the paragraph, Ryan, if you go down, where it says restorative approaches to attendance shall be used whenever possible, reflecting our district's philosophy of using restorative approaches when working with students.
Thank you, I appreciate that addition. So, any comments, questions? Ms. Capps?
Clarification question. What is there a definition of chronic absenteeism?
Chronic absenteeism is any time that a student has, when their attendance falls below 90%.
Got it.
So
missing
missing more
10%.
than 10% of the school year.
And I believe a letter is sent at that, that's the first.
Yes. So once a student, if that happens in September or December or March, whenever that happens, first letter goes out and then successive letters. So we have an entire system that we use. Yeah.
Thanks.
All right, I think we'll move that to consent. Thank you very much. Now move to item 13. First reading and discussion of board policy 5131.6, alcohol and other drugs. Dr. Wagner.
I bring to you a policy that was last updated about 9 years ago and so we are due for an update. Again, I made one change, and that is on the second page, number 1. The CSBA had not included non-prescription pharmaceuticals. And so I bring that to you as a consideration that in addition to alcohol, tobacco, cannabis, smokeless tobacco, etc., that pharmaceutical drugs be included in there because of the incidence of use of prescription medications by our students.
All right, do we have any comments? Yes, Ms. Parker.
I guess, you know, there are other drugs though besides cannabis. So I'm just wondering if there's a broader term.
Or we could use narcotics.
Yeah.
I think narcotics and pharmaceuticals being distinguished from each other, and
Yeah.
adding the narcotics in there as well.
That's good.
All right, thank you. I think we can move that to consent with that change.
Great.
Moving to item 14, first reading and discussion of board policy 5144.1, suspension and expulsion due process. Dr. Wagner.
Yes, this, again, we have just some minor changes that have been made by the state. It seems entirely appropriate to just accept the changes as proposed by CSBA.
Ms. Sims-Martin.
I just had a question on the K through 3. I think I'm not sure what paragraph it's in, where there no student K through 3 can be expelled except by a teacher. Is there someone else who could expel them, or?
Teachers have the right to suspend a student from the class, and so, and that is an in-school suspension. So for example, we're going to have you hang out with the principal for the rest of the day. They're suspended from class. They can be suspended for disrupt defiance in grades K through 3.
All right, we will move that to consent, thank you. Thank you. That's it. We'll now move to item 15, first reading and discussion of board policy 0000, that's an interesting number. Vision?
The beginnings of the school
The
district.
beginning, Mr. Matsuoka.
Wow, we went through all of those in 30 minutes. It's good. I put these last three at the end because they're big topics about the vision, mission, and philosophy of the school district. And so this first one on vision. I like how CSBA has, caught up some language around LCAP. Our LCAP really needs to hold a lot of the language about the mission, vision, work of the school district. And so, but this is a big topic. It's really one of the important things that a governing board with their superintendent and cabinet takes care of. That we need to make sure that our vision, mission, and philosophy is always up to date with what we believe. And also, this is now a new board, and so I think it's a really important time for this board to review these really big documents of mission, vision, philosophy. And there's another layer that's not captured. I really think core values are a really important belief set. I think core values and philosophy could overlap and be synonymous. So this is, as CSBA is really good at, is just outlining a process. What should we do around our vision statement? So I think I'll ask for the board for your thoughts about this policy statement, and what are your thoughts about the vision for our school district?
There is a request to speak. We want to have that person speak before.
Sure.
Okay. Ms. Veronica Plata, please.
Good afternoon, members of the board, Mr. Matsuoka. I agree, these last three are special and of high interest to parents and to staff. I wanted to comment just on the last, so the first, second, third, fourth, on the fifth to the last paragraph, so on the page 2 of 2, where it says input shall be solicited from parent, guardian, students, staff. I noticed in your other policies you specifically cite input from teachers, and I just wanted to suggest that in your review of this policy that you consider adding some language similar to your other policies that read, input shall be solicited from parents, guardians, students, staff, including but not limited to teachers. And I just feel that it's important for you to call that out specifically as a very important key stakeholder. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Board? Ms. Parker?
I'm appreciating what Ms. Gallardo said, and would be happy to include, teachers as a subset of staff to call that out. And other than that, I don't have any other language suggestion changes. I do agree that this is really important and foundational, not just a number, but and that essentially in the past this has been either like some sort of short-term or a long-term strategic plan kind of filled the vision role, and at that point, our strategic plan has essentially expired. So it's time for this board to, I think I like thinking of it as a long-range vision that has activities that focus on achievement and well-being, and will move the vision along, and that will support a vision. But I do think that we need to have that process, and it is time-consuming, but we need to get going on it.
I'm sort of throwing this out at the board in terms of one of our key values is, cultural diversity and really our cultural proficiency. And just, is there maybe language that we could provide sort of an inclusive around that, bringing in that more global perspective, 21st century global perspective relational to that? Our wordsmith, Ms. Parker, is always so good at that.
We could put it here. I'm not sure if that actually belongs in the actual
In the vision.
or if it's helpful to have it here so that future boards, when we're not here,
Exactly.
are thinking about that, in which case I would find a place to include the word inclusive. But there's a number of places where you could put it.
Yeah, I think to kind of merge the two comments, the reason why we would solicit input from this group of stakeholders would be to reflect the diversity that's inherent in our community, so perhaps connected to that point.
And I would suggest that you wordsmith it off, Dias, and then just bring it back on action.
All right, that sounds like a plan. Thank you. We will now move to item number 16. First reading and discussion of Board Policy 0100, Philosophy. Mr. Matsuoka.
I remember when I was reading through this, I thought, wow, CSBA just like wiped it all out. And probably kept the order and the sort of the main content, but you know, they did a pretty complete rewrite, 1 through 20. I mean, I read through each statement. They're all very, very good statements. I think we would all agree with every statement that's there. They're great philosophy statements. And we can always add our local versions, but I think it's a pretty comprehensive list. And I just think point number 4 is super important right now. The future of our nation and community depends on students possessing all the skills that we need them to have in the 21st century. So it's very relevant right now. So are there any subtractions or additions?
Before we go, we have a speaker on this item as well, Ms. Veronica.
No.
So you stay close because you're also speaking on the next one.
I will, because I have to read city college policies, might as well read your ours, right? So on this item, I agree with Mr. Matsuoka, it captures a lot, it's good. I just wanted to bring to your consideration and perhaps just add to discussion, it says every student should have an opportunity to receive a quality education regardless of his or her social, cultural, or economic background. The only item there would be political, so we're taking a student, social, cultural, political, economic. And the reason this speaks to me, not only as a parent, a community member, volunteer, and teacher, is because on whatever side of the political spectrum you fall right now, you're seeing conversations that are very divisive for students, for faculty, for staff. And I think, at least what I've learned, is that unfortunately it's more of the conservative student voice that is not feeling as welcome. And this changes with different seasons in our unfortunate political climate. And so I don't know if this is a place to add that, but I would like to be a part of a community where, regardless of your economic background, cultural, social, and political, you have a place at the table, students feel valued, respected, and that we're teaching our students to have these complicated conversations in a way that's respectful, that is honoring of each other's point of view, without limiting or squashing any one or the other. And of the other, on 8 through 12, we love the whole child, early identification, behavioral difficulties, that's good. For number 13, I don't know if you want to maybe just describe the intent behind the diversity of the student body and school staff. I know if you've kept up with some of our issues or topics at City College, this idea of diversity, how do you bring diversity and international students and what that means. Your school demographic, your boundaries, that many of our schools are not, most of the students are pretty homogeneous. There's only a handful of our schools where you do have a mix of diversity, not just in ethnic background, but in social, economic status. So that's just something that you can think about. And then number 15, I think it'd be worth adding something to that effect, but with staff. I think that statement reads very well, but it speaks directly with your relationship with the superintendent as your one employee and with the governing board. But I think that statement can be equally as important for staff and for faculty. And I think that was it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Quick comments? Ms. Parker?
Sorry, I'm looking through, because one of the things, she was talking about political, I was also thinking linguistic. And,
Oh, right.
and I was also, they had disability in some of their language that was deleted, and I wasn't sure if that, if that should be something that's brought up again. I couldn't find it in the new language, but maybe I'm just missing it. Yeah. So just on number 2, you could add in political, linguistic, but I would consider adding in,
Persons with disabilities?
but it's not, that's not the right form of it though.
No.
Social, cultural, and ability background doesn't work either, so maybe it needs to be in one of the other bullets, but I would suggest that this is one that we again take off Dias to wordsmith and bring it back on action. But I'm noting the points of the speaker, and I don't know if anybody else wants to.
Anyone else? Any other comments? I mean, at number 13, the diversity of the student body and school staff enriches the learning experience, promotes cultural awareness and acceptance, and serves as a model for citizenship in a global society. I think that's good. I think, I don't know if we want to, and this would be off Dias too, but if we need to be more specific in terms of, having an inclusive curriculum. When you say enriches the learning experience, what be a little more specific to that in terms of developing an inclusive curriculum in all subject areas, really. I don't know if that's the language right now, but I'm just saying that there's one thing to say strengthen or enriching the learning experience, but being more specific around our curriculum K-12.
One thought on that is the 5,000s or 4,000s that are in instruction. 6,000s. So that's a big section, and I think to your concerns about an inclusive curriculum, that will be explicitly captured in the 6,000 series. So we can include really anything in a philosophy statement. I view philosophy as, it's broad, it's guiding principles, openness, serving all kids. I think it's captured here. Boy, I'm trying to figure out where to weave in the students with special needs. It's, maybe we'd almost have to slow down and read this thoughtfully and say, there's probably a reason why they removed that from the philosophy area. It's probably captured again in instruction.
Well, is that something we can find out where it is specified? You said it's 600s or whatever?
We can explore that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the 6,000.
Or 6,000.
Yeah, we're going through section by section. Actually, it was cabinet members who had, some bandwidth in the last couple of weeks to bring this set to you. So I'm sure all of those issues around, cultural diversity and curriculum will be addressed in either with CSBA's language or our own local version of language.
I would imagine it's been in item 13, the umbrella word being diversity. Sometimes in a broad document like this, you can go down a path of listing and then the order is suspect and you know, maybe it was just consolidated under that umbrella of diversity, perhaps to be more equal to all kinds of interpretations of what that means.
You know, when you start calling out individual groups,
Right.
then you have to identify all of them.
Right.
But I think the, you know, questions about, you know, political, linguistic, I think those are good broad categories. Any other comments about philosophy statements?
So I guess we'll review this, or?
Yeah, I think there was some conversation from community input and board conversation, so why don't we make some edits to this and we'll bring this back for a second review. Okay, not for consent, but review.
Great, perfect, thank you.
Can I go back to the vision policy? I didn't hear any input about the language of the vision policy. So you're okay with the board policy. It's really the question of how do we update our vision with a new school board and with the district. That's going to be a process, so I'll have to think about how to set up stakeholders in a timeline. Somehow, I want to weave that in with existing structures that we have. You know, we have an LCAP process that is an annual process, and I would love to weave it into that so we don't do this separate process, because our LCAP and our school plan should be the keepers of our mission, vision, and goals. So I think we'll work with staff to try to kind of weave those two together.
All right, thank you. So we're moving to number 17, last but not least. First reading and discussion of board policy 0200, goals for the school district, Mr. Matsuoka.
So this one definitely needed some updates from the CSBA lens in light of all the changes that have happened to, you know, ed code and language, and I think especially to the budgeting and planning process. I mean, LCAP is our big vehicle now. And so when you look at the new language, it's actually much shorter. It really points to LCAP as the document and the process of goal setting. So I appreciate CSBA consolidating all that language around goal setting and really, again, steering it back towards LCAP. So comments or questions or suggestions?
And Speaker Baraka.
You took the time to write such good stuff, and thank you to the staff, because I know how much work this is. Just a similar comment on the first paragraph where it says, in developing goals and identifying strategies to achieve those goals, the board of superintendent shall solicit input and review from key stakeholders, included but not limited to teachers, would be what I would suggest that you consider. And same thing for in the last paragraph, in addition to the goals identified in the LCAP. At the bottom it says, as appropriate, each goal shall include benchmarks or short-term objectives that can be used to determine progress toward meeting the goal. I would like to suggest that you consider adding, when appropriate, also something about teachers being in that realm of what, you know, you decide that would look like.
Excuse me, where was that again? If we could scroll down.
So the last paragraph, it starts with in addition to, and it basically, the last sentence reads that as appropriate, each goal shall include benchmarks or short-term objectives that can be used to determine progress toward meeting the goal. And I would like to suggest that you add that when appropriate, teachers be involved in this. And the reason I thought of this is because I remember reading the LCAP a few years ago and seeing some of the metrics that were cited as evidence for meeting that goal, and it just made me think and wonder some things. And so I think if we call it out, we'll get some more meaningful, probably, evidence to add to your LCAP.
Thank you. Board comments? So, are we in agreement to add with the, do you have any suggestions to how to add that in, or does anyone have any problems with our Public comment, Ms. Steve?
I think I would ask Mr. Matsuoka if he has any issues with that, because I think that sounds reasonable to me.
Yeah, I think an explicit reference to teachers as a very clear stakeholder group, I think that's an appropriate statement. As far as how to include teachers, I would say the creation of benchmark short-term objectives. I appreciate the request. I'd have to think about how does an LCAP that is really like a 10,000 foot document, it is district-wide, how to involve teachers in the creation of those measurements and benchmarks, which really, this is that difficulty of big picture versus on the ground at the school level. And I mean, it's a valid question. That's the challenge of district level planning, is a small group could set out benchmarks and then the teachers go, when are you gonna ask us about what are the outcomes that you want us to do in our classrooms? I think that's a healthy tension to have. We are trying to create district LCAP goals that can be received by the site principals and their schools, and then figure out how they get there. So I think it's a valid question. We'll just have to come up with some language that still allows our LCAP process to happen, because it's like a February, March, April, May. We got 4 months, and then how does it provide enough flexibility for sites to implement a local version of accountability? So it's always a tension that we face. So we'll take a look at some language, and I'll tell you what, we'll bring this back as an updated language.
Thank you, and I just wanted to thank Ms. Gallardo for coming and sharing. And I think it's really crucial that we make sure that we have the feedback and input of our teachers. So thank you for being the voice. Any other comments? All right, so unless we have any other comments by Mr. Matsuo for the board, I will now adjourn our meeting.